Welcome everyone to this event on policy for recovery in Africa, regional integration and trade facilitation. My name is Bob Dewar, Associate Fellow with the Africa Programme of Chatham House. It's our warm pleasure to extend a very warm welcome to our distinguished speakers and panelists today, and to welcome you, also our audience participating through Zoom, and to all those joining via Facebook Live. Today's event is part of the partnership with the UNDP, which brings together expert speakers and decision makers to examine and exchange views on key challenges, potential solutions and approaches for implementation as African countries confront and aim to bounce back from the shocks of the COVID-19 pandemic. The series provides analysis and evidence-based policy towards recovery and towards the SDGs and the African Union's Agenda 2063. We're also delighted that today's event is held in collaboration with the South African High Commission in London and Chatham House's Common Futures Conversations initiative involving a network of young African opinion formers. Welcome again to our distinguished speakers. Her Excellency Nomathemba Tambo, High Commissioner of South Africa to the United Kingdom. His Excellency Wamkeli Mene, Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA Secretariat, who will give the keynote speech. And to our four panelists, Komi Tsowu, Regional Program Advisor and Project Manager, AfCFTA, UNDP Regional Services Center for Africa. Judith Ameso, Economic Affairs Officer, Regional Office for Africa at UNCTAD. Natasha Kimani, Strategy and Research Lead, Africa No Filter. And Jean Desire Kouassi, founder member of the Common Futures Conversations. And all the biographies of our distinguished speakers and panelists will be shared via the Zoom chat box. A few words first on housekeeping. The event will be held in English and in French with simultaneous interpretation throughout. And participants can use the interpretation function in the Zoom control bar that you will see at the bottom of the screen to select your preferred language. All attendees will be muted during the presentations, but can use the raise hand function during the Q&A session in order to ask a question live. And if selected, you'll be given the ability to unmute and ask your question. So please, if possible, please use the raise hand function. But apologies, of course, in advance if you're not able to ask a question this time. Zoom participants may also submit written questions through the Q&A box throughout the event. But if you can, as I say, please use the raised hand function. Unfortunately, we can't take questions from participants joining us through Facebook Live at this event. Please accept our apologies for that. The event will be on the record. The event will be on the record. Filming and recording are not allowed without prior permission from Chatham House, however, but we are very glad and you're very welcome to tweet the event, please, using the hashtag #CHAfrica. Now, the way today's event will unfold will be first some opening remarks by Her Excellency, the South African High Commissioner, and then the keynote address by His Excellency, the Secretary General of the AfCFTA, to be followed by 15 minutes Q&A. So please do get your questions ready for him early. And after that interaction, we will hear from our four panelists, following which we hope there will be ample time for further Q&A. Now, the AfCFTA is an exciting agenda for Africa and African integration and for its partners, as shown by the fact that the agreement was agreed and ratified at great speed. Recovery and bounce back from the COVID-19 pandemic is surely a key and urgent agenda on the desks of African decision makers, and the AfCFTA is a critical component for the continent's future, fitting as it does an evolving trade-focused development agenda, the need to boost intra-African trade, and the need to add value. It has real transformational potential. A particular interest at today's event is how it can not only benefit the more industrialized countries on the African continent, the main African multinational corporations and their business leaders, but also have benefit for young people, and for women and socio-economic development, including the more socio-economically marginalized, and for SMEs, for small and medium-sized businesses. So we very much look forward to the presentations and to the discussion. And I now turn to Her Excellency Nomathemba Tambo, High Commissioner of South Africa to the UN, to make some introductory remarks. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning to everyone. Good afternoon, I should say, to everyone, and welcome to this particularly important and timely discussion being hosted by the High Commission, which is being hosted by the High Commission together with our partner for this event, Chatham House's The Africa Programme, and its Common Futures Conversation. Let me acknowledge the efforts of Chatham and participate in discussions which seek to support engagement on successes and solutions to some of the challenges in the countries on the African continent. Let me also acknowledge the participation of the United Nations Development Programme, the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area, His Excellency Wamukele Mene, who together with his team must be acknowledged for the extremely successful Intra-African Trade Fair, which has just concluded and was hosted by the city of Durban, South Africa, from the 15th to the 21st of November. It is a pleasure to have you participate in this discussion. Colleagues and ladies and gentlemen, for the foreseeable future, all discussions are likely to start with the following introduction. We are all aware of the negative impact that COVID-19 has had on the world. That much has now been well established and accepted, but is being dealt with to varying degrees in different parts of the world based on differentiated capacities. Economic recovery is already underway for many countries in the north, and economic growth is being recorded, while also passing significant economic stimulus packages to support its citizens through the economic hardships caused by the pandemic. But for the developing South, in particular, countries on the African continent, economic recovery is severely constrained, given its historical challenges exacerbated in apartheid, as well as one challenge which requires special mention, and that is illicit financial flows. These rob the countries on the continent of the ability to finance some of the solutions to the economic challenges faced, as well as its socio-economic development. And so today's discussion, Policy for Recovery in Africa, Regional Integration and Trade Facilitation, is important, especially because the relevant stakeholders and role players are here today to assist with a better understanding of what needs to be done to support recovery of African economies. What is especially important within the context of the recent coming into force of the African Continental Free Trade Area is what benefits accrue from it. How this can support economic recovery, and whether more trade policy is required, or whether there is a need to expediently move towards the implementation. And here I'd like to quote former AU Commissioner, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, who said, and I quote, "Africa is not short on policy, but lacks on implementation," unquote. In closing, and before I wish you well with your discussion, I want to highlight just one of the objectives of the AfCFTA. As a flagship project of Agenda 2063, the Africa We Want, which is the African continent's development framework, the AfCFTA will be, quote, promoting and attaining sustainable and inclusive socio-economic development, gender equality, and structural transformation of the state parties, unquote. To unpack this in the simplest terms, it means to work future, its growth and development, and ultimately providing impetus and momentum towards all of the aspirations of Agenda 2063, but especially Aspiration 6, which speaks of an Africa whose development is people-driven, relying on the potential of African people, especially its women and youth, and caring for children. Like Agenda 2063, the AfCFTA, as one of its tools, is about creating a better life for the people of the continent, while simultaneously creating the environment to encourage the full attainment of their goals and aspirations. I wish everyone well and look forward to a robust discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much indeed for that introduction, High Commissioner, very much appreciated. And we now move on to the keynote speech for today on this event on policy and for recovery in Africa, regional integration and trade facilitation. And I'm delighted to say that His Excellency Wamkeli Meni, the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area, the AfCFTA Secretariat, has just arrived with us and who will now be able to give the keynote speech. And we much look forward to that. And Your Excellency Wamkeli Meni, just to say that what we've agreed in the initial introduction was that you might have a series of Q&A after your speech, if that's all right, just immediately following on from that, because I think there will be an audience extremely interested in that. But over to you, sir, and welcome.
Thank you very much, moderator. I am having problems with my video. I'm sure I don't think you are able to see me. I hope I hope you can hear me.
I can hear you very well, so thank you very much for that. We can't see you, but please, it's we look forward to your words of wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm trying to switch on the video. It is saying it's loading. We are at a very, very exciting time as a continent, and the topic that you've chosen today, in my view, captures really the phase that Africa is in, regional integration, as well as trade facilitation, the drivers of Africa's reinvigorated trade environment. So it is a particularly exciting time for us. We now have 38 countries that are state parties to the agreement establishing the AfCFTA. There's only one country that has not yet signed the agreement establishing the AfCFTA. We have unprecedented political will to make sure that regional economic integration in Africa does become a reality. And the fact that we have 38 countries who have ratified the agreement establishing the AfCFTA is, to me, a demonstration of commitment, legal commitment to market integration, to reducing barriers to trade, to reducing barriers to to investment. As you know, intra-Africa trade is very low. It's at 18%. When you compare that to intra-European trade, which is close to 70%, and intra-North America trade, which is above 60%, Africa is certainly on the lower end of intra-regional trade. Our trade patterns as a continent continue to be characterized by the old colonial patterns of trade. We trade more with outsiders than we trade amongst ourselves as a continent. And that is what the African continental free trade area is all about. It is about changing Africa's trade patterns that have existed over the last 60 years. We had a very significant challenge over the last 60 years of underdevelopment, smallness of national economies, lack of economies of scale, shallow productive capacity, and then of course the over-reliance on the export of primary commodities, which is something that many countries continue today to rely on the export of primary commodities and very little value addition manufacturing capacity in some countries. One of the key objectives of the African continental free trade area is to accelerate industrial development in Africa, to change the patterns of trade so that we have more trade in value-added production. We reduce this reliance on the export of primary commodities, and that will position our continent for competitiveness in the decades to come. So the AfCFTA is not just a trade agreement, in my view. It is Africa's economic development tool, which takes account of the very negative condition that Africa has been in over the last 60 years or so. I've just referred to the lack of industrial development on our continent. We intend to make sure that all countries who are state parties to the agreement, that they benefit. We want to make sure that there is inclusivity in the benefits of this agreement. We've learned lessons from trade agreements around the world. We've learned that if a trade agreement excludes very important segments of society, small, medium enterprises, young entrepreneurs, that it's not going to be successful in the long term. We know that there are countries in Africa who are state parties to the agreement establishing the AfCFTA. We know that there are countries who will be immediate beneficiaries because these countries have a relative industrial base, export capacity is there. And these are countries such as Kenya, South Africa, Morocco, and so on. But where we are to succeed in implementation of this agreement, it will be in its inclusivity. So that countries that today may not have an industrial base, industrial capacity, that this agreement should be leveraged to help those countries to establish such an industrial base in 30 to 40 years' time. And the example of AGOA is a case in point. If you recall, when AGOA was being negotiated with the US, very few countries had the export capacity to export to the United States. And through the experience of AGOA in the last 25 years, what we've seen is that in Lesotho, for example, Lesotho is now able to export garments under AGOA, export them to the United States. But you have to be very deliberate about how you create opportunities for inclusivity in the implementation of a trade agreement. And that is what we want to distinguish this particular trade agreement is in its inclusivity and the benefits being shared by all countries. I hope that investors will look at this as a positive development. The fact that we now have a rules-based trading system that is underpinned by trade law. We have a protocol on dispute settlement and the resolution of disputes, which is a very strong signal to not only African investors, but to global investors. It's a very, very strong signal that we are committed to a rules-based trading system. The protocol on dispute settlement of the AfCFTA is based on international best practice. It is intended to ensure that we build investor confidence as we implement this agreement. We know that there will be disputes. That happens all over the world in trade agreements. The key issue will be how those disputes will be managed and will be resolved. And this protocol on dispute settlement of the AfCFTA seeks to apply international best practice in the resolution of disputes that may arise under the AfCFTA. Now, let me just conclude by giving you a sense of the things we have been doing in the last year and a half, which are very practical tools for implementation of the AfCFTA. First, we are working with Afreximbank to establish a Pan-African payments and settlement system. We all know that today in Africa, there are over 42 currencies. The cost of currency convertibility is close to $5 billion annually. If you are in South Africa, you want to trade with somebody in Kenya, you have to first convert the South African rand into the dollar, and you transact. The recipient has to then convert the dollar to the Kenyan shilling, and this costs $5 billion annually. So with this payments and settlement system, we will now be able to trade under the AfCFTA using our local currency without having to convert to the dollar. And I believe this will make a trade in Africa more affordable, efficient, and of course, accessible to millions and millions of Africans who want to trade across the borders. The second very important tool for implementation, which we have been working on, is we are establishing an adjustment fund, an AfCFTA adjustment fund. We will start with a minimum amount of $1 billion, and we will mobilize the international community to raise more funds. And by the international community, I mean also development finance institutions in Africa and commercial banks. We know that there will be countries that will suffer short-term adjustments as they implement this agreement, as they reduce and eliminate tariffs, they will lose revenue. And so this adjustment fund is a tool to enable those countries to cushion the shock of reducing or eliminating tariffs. It is going to be operational immediately, early next year, and the countries that will need the fund will be able to, in a very transparent manner, to apply for the fund and to state exactly what sectors, what interventions in which sectors the fund will be expected in their own country. A very important tool for enabling and supporting regional integration as well as supporting implementation of the AfCFTA. The third tool, again, an important tool, is a digital platform called Africa Trade Gateway, which will be operational early next year. It will have on a digital platform all trade-related information that small and medium enterprises may want to know. It will have information about a particular market that you are in, your counterparty, due diligence information, rules of origin, customs procedures. We think it's very important that small and medium enterprises are enabled to benefit from this agreement by having the right tools for them to be able to trade. And so the Africa Trade Gateway is a very important tool for inclusion of small and medium enterprises as we roll out and implement the AfCFTA. If we don't have these supporting tools, particularly directed towards small and medium enterprises, then I'm afraid that the only beneficiaries will be the large corporations in Africa who have an army of lawyers who will be able to immediately access new markets that have been opened up by the agreement. And so it's very important that these tools that I've just mentioned, that these tools are at the heart of our market integration effort and our trade facilitation effort. Let me conclude by observing the following. There was a study last year by the World Bank, and the World Bank observed that where Africa implements the AfCFTA and does so effectively, by the year 2035, we have an opportunity to lift 100 million Africans out of moderate and abject poverty, and that we have an opportunity to contribute to Africa's GDP, $450 billion of trade, which will be generated by the AfCFTA. And that, of course, we will have an opportunity to increase intra-Africa trade by up to 80%. It's a very, very positive and encouraging projections, but they will not happen by chance. We will have to work hard to make sure that we implement this agreement. As other countries around the world, as they are deploying economic recovery tools, large bailout packages, large amounts going into trillions and trillions of dollars, Africa does not have the monetary policy space, nor the fiscal policy space to deploy large amounts of economic recovery stimulus packages post-COVID-19. And so this projection by the World Bank, to me, directs us to aggressively implement the AfCFTA as part of economic recovery post-COVID-19, so that trade in Africa can be one of the drivers of economic recovery and can be one of the drivers of and stimulating the re-emergence of the services sector, the re-emergence of the airline industry. It's very, very important that as we implement this agreement, we do so aggressively with the projection of the World Bank in mind. I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you our thoughts on the AfCFTA, and I look forward to a discussion in the next segment. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Your Excellency. Thank you very much, Secretary General. That was a very clear and very focused explanation that you've given us of what you are doing and where you are going. It really is an exciting agenda. Could I just say to all our participants that please, if you could think about questions you'd like to ask, please use the raise hand function, and also the Q&A chat box is available. So please put up your questions on this key agenda item. I wanted to ask you one thing, if I might, Secretary General, and I think you went into the inclusion dimension of your policy very well, and very, very interesting. I recall, and these instruments that you are, and these tools that you are creating are designed to that. But I wondered if you had the space and time now to expand a little bit in detail, if you had any further initiatives that you're planning. In your speech, I recall when you became the Secretary General, you said that in due course you'd announce more specific measures to enable women, young Africans and SMEs to benefit from the AfCFTA. You've mentioned a couple already, but I wondered whether you're able to say any more of that. I'm also mindful of the fact that I saw that there was an important UNDP futures report just released the other day, looking at value chains. And clearly within new potential value chains in Africa, there may be scope for favoring or for SMEs to benefit in particular in some of those chains. Perhaps, I don't know if that's part of your thinking. Would you like to, before I turn to other questions which are emerging, would you like to possibly address that question? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Last month, we hosted young people in a summit called Youth Connect, where we identified specific value chains that young entrepreneurs can benefit from in the implementation of the AfCFTA. When I was in Malawi 2 months ago, I met a young woman entrepreneur who is in the agro-processing business and who wants to make sure that she's able to export under the AfCFTA, a significant market outside of her region. She's looking at Nigeria, Egypt, and so on. And so it's important that we, in the identification of these value chains, that we have young people and we match young people, young entrepreneurs, we match them with specific market access opportunities. And we have already begun to do that in the report that you mentioned, which we launched on Sunday, the Africa Futures Report, which is really a very important development in affirming the role of young people and women-led businesses in the implementation of the AfCFTA. The reason we've partnered with UNDP is because I feel very strongly that if we want to have a trade agreement that is inclusive, we will need the right expertise to advise us on how to go about that objective. And UNDP, of course, has a deep experience on matters related to development and inclusivity. So we are very much excited about the partnership with UNDP. We're excited about identifying value chains for young people. We also are in discussions with the African Development Bank. The African Development Bank will soon launch a fund that will be for young entrepreneurs to enable them to trade, to trade under the AfCFTA. So some of these initiatives, we are a trade secretariat. We have to partner with the right, those who have the right skills. For example, UNDP, African Development Bank, AfrExim Bank. These are development finance institutions with deep expertise in mobilizing resources. And I believe very strongly that we must position young entrepreneurs as the immediate beneficiaries of the AfCFTA.
Great. Thank you very much. We do have now several hands raised, so that would be great. And we have the chance, I think, to unmute them and ask individual questions. Can I ask you, Your Excellency, whether you prefer several questions in a row or individual questions, and how long you'll be able to stay with us for questions?
Well, we can take maybe a cluster of 3 questions.
Yeah.
I will respond to 3 questions.
Okay.
I have been given by my colleagues about 30 more minutes.
Excellent.
So we have some time.
Right. Well, perhaps if I could start by asking Robin Guin if you could ask your question live. And if you could say who you represent as well, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Indeed.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Your Excellency, I'm Robin Guin. I'm an independent business consultant based in the UK. Thank you very much, Secretary General, for your update. You referred to, I think, the unprecedented political will to make the agreement happen, which I think, as you say, is excellent news for all of us. But I think that was on the level of bilateral country engagement. Could I ask you just to say a bit more about how discussions are going with the existing regional frameworks and secretariats across the continent, and also what impact there may be over time for the UK, the EU, and other external organisations which have existing agreements with the, if you like, the sub-regional bodies at the moment? Thank you.
Great, thank you. And we'll have 2 more questions, and then we'll have another cluster after that, if that's all right, Secretary General. So could I ask Gloria and Gumi? You could ask your question, and please identify who you are. Thank you.
Good. Thanks very much, Mr. Mene, for a really illuminating presentation. I wonder if you could just update us on where the negotiations are on both on tariff reduction and on rules of origin and so on. And so when we can perhaps expect the first, if that's not already happened, the first widget to cross a border under the terms of the AfCFTA. Thanks very much.
Okay, and now, thank you very much, Peter. Our third question from Hilda Rapp.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Mene. I am aware that you made a wonderful speech at the Aswan conference in March with the WTO, where you and the Director General remarked also on how important this trade agreement is for promoting peace and security in Africa. And I just wonder whether you would share a little bit more about that dimension, which I think is a very important precondition for successful trade.
We have 3 questions there, Secretary General, if you're able to answer that cluster. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The regional economic communities play a very important role. The work of the regional economic communities, their mandate is to boost trade within the region. Our mandate is complementary to that effort. We connect, for example, East Africa and West Africa. The job of the AfCFTA is to make sure that across the regions, trade does happen. And so there will always be this complementarity of roles between the regional economic communities, the secretariats, and the AfCFTA Secretariat. One day, Africa will become a customs union. When that happens, when Africa becomes a customs union, and of course it's going to take a long time, the regional economic communities will have to, their mandates will then at that point have to be re-looked at, because we will be one customs union. And so you cannot have a customs union within a customs union. So, but that is a long way from now. It will happen, but it's a long way from now. So it is a very important role that the regional economic communities play. Pre-existing trade agreements are not affected by the AfCFTA's entry into force. The obligations that countries undertook bilaterally will continue to be respected in the context of that bilateral relationship. So we are clear in the agreement that countries retain the right to enter into third country, what we call third country agreements. And certainly there is an expectation that pre-existing agreements, trade agreements, have to be respected. The update on the negotiations, we have outstanding work to do on rules of origin in the area of automotives, sugar, textiles, and clothing. We have agreement on 87.6% rules of origin have been agreed to. And if you think about it this way, this is close to 8,000 products in a typical harmonized system of classification of products. So we've done remarkable work in reaching 87.6% of convergence on rules of origin. And what that means is that going forward, you will now be able to access the AfCFTA tariff book, which we will publish next month. You will be able to access the AfCFTA tariff book, and you will be able to tell with certainty what local content requirement rules, what rules of origin apply to a particular product. And that is something that is, I believe, is a very important development. Once we have agreed, and I hope by early next year, once we have agreed on the outstanding areas on automotives, on sugar, textiles, and clothing, we want to make sure that we now have 100% convergence of rules of origin in a tariff book that is easily downloadable on our website, and this will enhance predictability and certainty of trading on the African continent. So that work is quite advanced. The trading, the individual countries are at the moment establishing the customs systems that are required for trading to happen. The countries that have signaled that they are ready and that they have systems, that would be Egypt, Kenya, and I believe South Africa has also signaled that they have gazetted the AfCFTA from a custom systems point of view. So this is very, very important work that we want to conclude early next year. There are no inhibitions to countries trading now. Countries can trade now on the basis of the 86%, the 87% that we have achieved. That is a very, very strong basis for trading. If you will know that even at the WTO, the threshold is around 75%, where we say substantively all trade. So we've exceeded that that gold standard, if you want, and we have reached a large convergence on the rules of origin. The tariff book, as I mentioned earlier, the tariff book that will be published will be the document, the instrument that will guide traders, that traders can know when they want to send goods to a particular country. That tariff book will be of great assistance to facilitate that. The last question on peace and stability, yes, I agree entirely that without peace, without stability, it's not possible to trade. And so where there are continued incidents of instability on the African continent, that is a constraint to boosting intra-Africa trade. And so we, when we make our presentations, when we do our reports to the Assembly of Heads of States and Government of the African Union, we stress the importance of the linkage between peace and trade on the other hand, and that you cannot have trade if there are no peaceful conditions. We know from the experience of, for example, cross-border traders, who are usually the drivers of trade across borders, we know how very negatively they are impacted where there are incidents of instability, particularly around border towns and around border communities. So I think those were the questions that were put.
Great, and very full answers, much appreciated. Your Excellency, can I just ask, how much more time have you got?
I think we have about 15 minutes.
Okay, so if I may put a cluster, 2 clusters of 3, would that be okay?
Yes, that's fine.
And then what we will do is move on to the panel and in a way slightly change around the format, but that's very, very good opportunity for everybody to have you here to interact directly with you. Is much appreciated. So the 3 questions, I'd start with 3 written questions. The first is from Cynthia Liao, who works with Chatham House. What are the ambitions of the AfCFTA for organizing an African trade bloc to negotiate favorable trade and investment terms as a continent with other countries and with regional blocs? The second question is from Liz May. How will the AfCFTA interact with other FTAs that countries have signed, e.g. the EPAs with the EU and the UK, and a possible US-Kenya FTA? It seems that liberalization towards these highly developed markets could complicate matters, especially for LDCs, and it might make sense to pause implementation to focus efforts on the Continental project. And thirdly, Samuel Lemisu Ole Sunkdi, inclusion of AfCFTA is a very important key factor in promoting and implementing one or many key objectives of the AfCFTA. Does the youth in Africa have space in implementation of the AfCFTA? Thank you very much. And I'll pose another group after that very quickly, once you've finished. Thank you so much. If you could reply to those.
The AfCFTA is not a customs union. It's a free trade area. And that means, therefore, that we are legally not in a position to negotiate as a bloc. In other words, as AfCFTA or as Africa. Individual countries continue to have exclusive jurisdiction, exclusive competence to negotiate with third countries. So we don't have the mandate legally to negotiate on behalf of, as a bloc. One day when we become a customs union, then we will be in the position to negotiate on behalf of the entire continent, because in a customs union, as you know, there is a common external tariff. And so we will, at that point, be in a position to negotiate as a bloc. What we do now is a fair amount of advocacy to say that trade agreements that countries enter into must support regional integration in Africa. So if a country is engaging in a trade agreement with a third country, the expectation is that that particular trade agreement must support regional integration on the African continent. We have, it is, of course, something that heads of states recognized, that there may be some disruptions if third countries start negotiating. In fact, there's a very clear decision of the Assembly of Heads of States and Government of the African Union, where they agreed that we should first consolidate consolidate the AfCFTA and its implementation. At the same time, I should stress, at the same time, countries have the right, under the AfCFTA, countries have the right to enter into third country agreements as they deem fit, as part of their exercise of sovereignty. So it may appear as if there are tensions between what I've just said, that on the one hand, we say we want to consolidate implementation of the AfCFTA. On the other hand, we say that that third countries, you can enter into a trade agreement with a third country, but it is in practice, we have to recognize the reality. And the reality is that countries will want to exercise their sovereignty by entering into trade agreements with whomever they may so wish. The youth involvement is important. I mentioned Youth Connect that we had last month in Ghana. We also have an AfCFTA youth forum for engaging young people. I believe very strongly that the report that we have just published with UNDP will be a very helpful instrument for ensuring that we make space for young people to be active participants in the implementation of the AfCFTA. Because the AfCFTA is not just a trade agreement, as I mentioned earlier. It's a tool for Africa's economic recovery. Now, the last question, I believe, was interface or interaction with other FTAs. Each individual country will have to manage its own customs procedures, will have to implement the agreement alongside other pre-existing obligations. That is something that is taken as expected. So you will find that an individual country will be implementing maybe 3 or 4 trade agreements at the same time. What will be required is that the country must have the customs systems in place. I think the underlying point that I agree with, and that is that there has been some concern expressed over the last year about how other agreements impact on the AfCFTA. And what I would say is that whether they are pre-existing trade agreements or trade agreements that will be concluded in future, that they must not disrupt implementation of the AfCFTA. They must support implementation of the AfCFTA, and they must be complementary to the objectives of the AfCFTA.
Great, thank you very much. Detailed responses. We'll have a final cluster of questions for you. And then we'll go on to the panel. Just to reassure the panel, we will do that. If I can ask Dr. Mohammed Hassan Mohammed to ask his question live, that would be great.
Hello, good afternoon.
Yes, would you like to put your question, Dr. Mohammed?
Yes, good afternoon, the moderator.
Thank
Hello,
you.
good afternoon.
If you could explain, yes, we can hear you. Can you explain who you are and so on?
Yes.
To start with, thank you.
Let me first of all appreciate the presenter for the quality delivery he has made. My question is one. Hello?
Yes,
can you
hear
me?
you.
Yes, I want the presenter to please speak to the enthusiasm and the political commitment of the head of government on the African continent to the implementation of this laudable initiative. That is one. And two, what is the continent doing in terms of trying to harmonize other international conventions on trade as regards to this particular initiative in the continent? So please, I want him to shed light to these 2 issues. Thank you.
Thank you. And then, Secretary General, if I can just give you 3 quick questions in addition, and that'll be the end of the round. First of all, from Gloria Ngumi, how is the African Continental Free Trade Area structured to adapt to the proposed EU carbon border adjustment mechanism? Secondly, from Victor Mark Onigbu, what is the AfCFTA Secretariat doing regarding the social inhibitions to free trade? Many countries still don't trust themselves and prefer to rather trade with industrialized economies outside the continent. And how are they tackling the social cohesion component? And finally, Nazia Smith, 41 of 54 countries have ratified, which is very much the first step. The big challenge is getting countries to domesticate this agreement, and in some cases overrule domestic interests which may compete. What has the AfCFTA put in place to support and encourage countries to actually make intra-Africa trade a reality in their countries? Thank you very much. Over to you, Wamkeli.
Thank you. Thank you again. There is, in my view, an unprecedented political will to implement this agreement. There is unprecedented legal commitment to implement this agreement. The large number of countries that have ratified this agreement is testament to that. This was the fastest instrument to be ratified under the African Union. And that to me demonstrates that, that the heads of government are fully aware of the importance of this agreement. And so every head of state that I meet with, all of them, the heads of states that I've met with, have given me absolute assurance that, they are committed to the AfCFTA. In terms of harmonization with other international agreements, well, again, as I was mentioning in the context of interface with other free trade areas, the AfCFTA is not a customs union. Interface with other interaction with other international agreements is still done at the national level. It is still done by individual countries in accordance with their trade laws or trade policies, or indeed in accordance with their foreign policy objectives. So there will not be a harmonization as such with other international agreements. There will be a complementarity. For example, the AfCFTA will be notified under Articles 24 and 5 of the GATS and the GATT respectively of the WTO. That already is a signal of how the WTO will be an important facilitator of regional trade in Africa. There are efforts at hand currently for countries to implement the AfCFTA at national level, the domestication that the questioner was referring to. That is happening. It's in some countries, it is happening much faster because of institutional capacities. But by virtue of the ratification, a country is expected to make sure that its domestic laws, that they are in conformity. They bring their domestic laws in conformity with the AfCFTA, which is now trade law. So that effort is taking place. But sometimes it's not, you don't realize that a certain law or legislation has not been amended to be consistent with the AfCFTA or with any other trade agreement until you are faced with a dispute. So it does happen, and I'm sure that there will be cases where a country will say, hang on a minute, we actually did not, this legislation is inconsistent with our obligations under the AfCFTA. So I think we should expect that that will happen. We are working with regional economic communities. We're working with customs union. We're working with individual countries to raise awareness about the AfCFTA and to make sure that there is implementation at national level. Each individual country is expected to have an AfCFTA implementation committee, which will be the first port of call for implementation at national level. I think we must expect that it is going to take time. This is a very comprehensive agreement with far-reaching obligations. It's an agreement that covers trade in goods, trade in services, digital trade, women and young people. There will be a protocol on women and young people. So it's a very comprehensive, its scope is very, very comprehensive. And that will create some difficulties in implementation and in particularly at national level by the sheer scope of the agreement. So it's a very, very significant endeavor that we are undertaking. It will take us time, but I'm very confident that with the political will that exists today, I'm confident that we will succeed to implement the agreement.
Good luck, and congratulations on all your efforts so far and your team. And I thank you to everyone for bearing with us while we had this quite large range of questions for His Excellency the Secretary General. We turn now to the final component of our meeting for the next 20 minutes, when we'll be listening to our distinguished panel. And can I just ask the panel if they wouldn't mind also taking into consideration within their comments what His Excellency Wamkeli Meni has been saying, and perhaps reflect on them within the comments that you make, if there are any thoughts that you want to bring, having heard him, because there won't be any space, I don't think, for questions and answers afterwards. But this is a tremendous panel. I'd like to go and ask Komi Tso to speak next, Regional Program Advisor and Project Manager for the AfCFTA UNDP Regional Services Center for Africa. So over to you, Komi. Thank you.
Thanks, I hope you can hear me clearly. So thank you, and thanks as well for an invitation. I think this is also, as the SG Wamkeli has mentioned, quite topical issue. Trade facilitation today under the AfCFTA, I think, is at the top of the agenda of the continent. And we, from UNDP side, we have taken a developmental perspective approach to really see how we can make the AfCFTA inclusive, from design of policy to implementation, and beyond implementation of actions, what are the concrete complementary interventions that will make the AfCFTA very inclusive. Looking specifically issues and interests of SMEs, and in priority, those SMEs that are led by women and youth. The SG has mentioned, and then there are some few questions as well, refer to the fact that the continent continue to rely on export of commodities, and we know that this kind of trade pattern increases the vulnerability of African economies to commodity markets with the volatilities and resource costs. Now, the hope is that the AfCFTA, then by integrating, African economies, will create larger markets that then will lead or help businesses achieve economies of scale while producing toward those markets. We also believe that the AfCFTA, beyond trade, can be seen as an opportunity to undertake a number of reforms related to trade, industrialization, gender, education, and so and so, to really address some of the persisting issues that affect the regional or national economies. We have seen, for instance, that relying on remote markets is quite risky, especially when we face crisis. And COVID-19 has reminded us that country can still decide to restrict export of essential goods during crisis. So for the continent, it will be important to rely on shorter supply chains, which means African countries should produce more of what they consume. And the AfCFTA provide the framework to do that. And when it comes specifically to access to medical output, for instance, we do believe that the IP, intellectual property rights, a protocol that is being discussed, negotiated under the AfCFTA, will set kind of a framework, or will put incentive for African to also produce or design, some of the medicine across the continent. We have also looked specifically at how implementation of the AfCFTA can contribute to the Agenda 2013, the Sustainable Development Goals. For instance, when we consider the SDG 2, which aim to achieve zero hunger, it's true that the AfCFTA, by facilitating trade, will ensure a smooth move of goods from one area to another cross-border. And we do believe that this will contribute, for example, to ensure food security in some region that might be hit by maybe climate shock and others. When it comes to SDG 9, for instance, which aim to scale up industrial development, that is really what the AfCFTA aims to achieve. So we do believe that then achieving the AfCFTA goals or ambition will contribute to also achieve directly or indirectly some of the sustainable development goals. So that's why we are collaborating with a number of institutions. Of course, we collaborate with the AfCFTA Secretariat. Colleagues or people have mentioned the recent future report that was launched few days ago, and SG also mentioned those of the value chain that we believe could be inclusive when, if we are able to establish those value chains, such as leather and leather products. Some of the agro-food value chain as well will be important to ensure inclusive AfCFTA. But to conclude, what I want to insist on here is that the AfCFTA will not automatically lead to inclusive growth. First, to have an inclusive growth under the AfCFTA, we need an inclusive AfCFTA, which means that voice and interest of small players, usually SMEs, especially those that are led by women and youth, need to be considered or taken on board from the design of policies to implementation. And this is something we are doing. It's also important to reduce trade costs. Today, I think there are several ways to do that. Digitalizing trade procedures, promoting paperless trade. So these are some of the key interventions that will help reducing trade costs for businesses within the continent, especially for SMEs. So these are some of the key issues I wanted to put forward, but I will be pleased to respond to any question later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Important points made there, Komi. Thank you very much. I can turn now to Judith Ameso, Economic Affairs Officer, Regional Office for Africa of UNCTAD. The floor is yours, Judith.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, participants. I have been asked to speak about the opportunity of the AfCFTA and what is required for implementation of the agreement. And I think I have a little bit of an easier job because the SG in his the Secretary General of the AfCFTA in his keynote has already done an excellent job of touching on some of the opportunities in as far as industrialization, inclusivity, and intra-African trade go. But by far the biggest opportunity of the AfCFTA is the access to a large continental market, along with addressing the issue of fragmentation of African markets. And here we are talking about 55 African countries, approximately 1.3 billion people, and a GDP of about $3.4 trillion that traders and firms across the continent can tap into. Now, once we have the integrated markets, this can then create an environment that is conducive for efficiency gains from economies of scale, and also increased competitiveness with better access to an efficient use of resources, whether it's labor or capital or technologies, as well as with the development of regional value chains. Secondly, there's an opportunity for economic growth and diversification. Now, if you're looking in terms of intra-African exports, for example, these are forecast to increase by anywhere between 15 and 25% by the year 2040. This is just intra-African exports. And the largest increases would be seen in industrial products like textiles, wood and paper, leather, electronics, and so on and so forth. And the AfCFTA would help to generate economic activities for higher value added, both at the national and regional levels. And this will result in greater diversification for African economies with the promotion of regional value chains. A lot has been said about inclusivity, and this is also another opportunity for inclusive and sustainable trade and development, in the spirit of leaving no one behind, specifically by including the vulnerable groups such as women and youth. And this can be achieved by improving their access to new opportunities, and also increasing their participation and integration in more productive and higher paid sectors of the economy. In terms of what is expected or required of countries to implement the agreement to the full ambition, I'm going to highlight 5 key things that countries must do. The first, of course, is signing and ratification. We've already heard that there are 54 countries that have signed the agreement and 35 that have ratified the agreement. And it's important for African countries to ratify the AfCFTA because by doing so, they consent to liberalizing 90% of tariff lines and undertaking and implementing services commitments, and thereby benefiting from the agreement. The second thing is member states and state parties must conclude negotiations on key protocols, and this includes primarily on rules of origin. Again, we've had an update on that, as well as finalizing and submitting the tariff offers and schedules of services commitments, which will then pave way for countries to engage in deeper trade under the AfCFTA, beyond the 87.6% where we're currently at with the rules of origin. The third requirement is for domestication of the agreement. State parties will definitely need to introduce obligations that the agreement imposes on them into their respective national laws and regulations. Most fundamentally, this will require changing their tariff schedules and some of their services regulations to reflect their trade in goods and trade in services commitments that they have undertaken as part of the negotiations and as part of the agreement. The fourth requirement is on institutions. countries must create institutional structures for implementation. And the AfCFTA agreement, in some cases, it requires implementation through institutions such as the NTB, such as national non-tariff barriers committees or national AfCFTA committees. And such institutions are key in determining whether and how successful implementation will be at national level. Finally, countries must develop national AfCFTA implementation strategies. These will guide implementations, but they must be complementary to the broader development framework of each country. So far, there are about 44 countries that have developed or are in the process of developing such implementation strategies. And typically, these strategies will facilitate the identification of key value addition opportunities, the identification of trade opportunities and constraints, looking at measures and capacities required for a country to take full advantage of the continental market. So these are the 5 key issues that I wanted to highlight, and I'll stop here at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judith, and evidently work to be done, but very clearly set out there in a very positive way. Thank you so much. We turn now to Natasha Kimani, who is Strategy and Research Lead for Africa No Filter. And over to you, Natasha. Delighted to have you with us.
Thank you, Bob. Good evening, everybody. And before I begin, I'm just going to post on the chat box our latest report at Africa No Filter. And I will be solely discussing points around this in relation to the AfCFTA agreement. We recently published a report around young Africans' narratives around Pan-Africanism and continental integration. And one of the key things that we found in this report is that while young Africans are optimistic about the continent and being part of this amazing continent that we live in, most of them are unable to travel across the continent. So while we want to be part of Pan-Africanism, and while Pan-Africanism and continental integration matters to us, travel inhibitions ensure that we are unable to achieve what we want to achieve. And these are some of the things I am hoping when we begin discussing integration and trade, we begin thinking around how these conversations actually affect the young lives of Africans. What does it mean for young Africans to begin to trade? What does it mean for an African in Kenya trading with a young African in Botswana? Are they able to do so? What are the restrictions in place? How can we ensure that there's a common understanding that when they apply for a visa, that there will not be the same restrictions that young Africans face when they're applying for visas in countries in the West? And we have found that a lot of young Africans struggle not just to get visas, but it's cheaper to get a flight to Europe than it is to get a flight to some African countries. So when we begin thinking about trade, we need to be more practical about it. The amazing thing about the AfCFTA agreement is that it is an enabler for sustainable growth, it's inclusive growth and sustainable development. And more specifically, it's meant to enable young Africans and women to be able to grow and live sustainably in the continent, because these are some of the most marginalized communities. But if they're unable to trade because of these restrictions, then we may find that the AfCFTA agreement just remains a pipe dream. I would like to urge us all, when we begin thinking about the basics of implementation, we need to practically align with the current struggles that young Africans are facing. And His Excellency Mena spoke about even the creation of a fund for young Africans. I would like to encourage us to think beyond simply creating funds, but creating opportunities for young Africans to be able to trade across. Young Africans face challenges, and our report also highlighted the same, that while Pan-Africanism is an ideal, it is an ideal mostly around sub-Saharan Africa. There are parts of Africa, some parts of North Africa, that do not consider themselves African. How can we then begin having conversations about a continental trade agreement when some parts of the continent do not feel like they're part of Africa? So these are some of the conversations we need to begin having and interrogating. How can we first have conversations that trigger us to begin thinking differently about what it means to be African, to begin thinking differently about what it means to trade in Africa and the cost of that trade, but most importantly, to begin thinking about the impact this trade is going to have on the lives of young Africans. These are some of the things I would like us to marinate on and figure out as we begin talking about what the future will look like. But most importantly, as we seek to ensure that young Africans and young entrepreneurs are going to recover from the challenges that COVID-19 brought upon them and their financial and the financial restrictions that they are facing. I would also like to highlight that the report that I've shared here also highlighted that though young Africans are positive about being African, a majority of the news and information they consume about business in Africa and just trading in Africa is negative. Most of the things we read in the media about corruption, underdevelopment, and negative narratives. So some of these things hinder young Africans from wanting to engage and wanting to live and work in other African countries. Some of the things we found in the report when we interviewed young Africans in 9 African countries was that there is still an issue of xenophobia. Well, a lot of young Africans do not find themselves xenophobic. We have found in the conversations that have emerged from the report that some Africans living in African countries are struggling to make a living from trade, are struggling to exist in some African countries. So while we do want to expand our scope and trade cross-border, these are some of the challenges we face. So how can we as a region and as governments start thinking differently about the Africans living in our countries? How can we ensure that the conversations we are having about trade include conversations about inclusivity, ensuring that we are creating environments where Africans from other countries can come and live, work, create wealth in a way that is sustainable, not just for themselves, but for us as countries. So as we begin to think about the bigger pictures and the agreements that we are seeing, I would like us to just take a micro approach and have conversations with young Africans. What we have been doing at Africa No Filter is also carrying around focus groups discussions with young creatives who have felt marginalized by a lot of the conversations taking place around trade. So one of the things I would like to encourage the UNDP and His Excellency Mene is to begin conversations with the young creatives from across the continent. Begin conversations of how we can amplify creativity by ensuring that it is part of the conversations around trade. How can we ensure that young creatives are not left out of this conversation? But most importantly, how can we simplify the conversations around trade? How can we ensure that we are not overcomplicating the conversations around trade to ensure that a young African who is not urban educated, who's not living in a city and who is not just drinking cappuccinos as a normal everyday thing is still able to understand the impact that this trade agreement is going to have on their lives? So I would like to challenge us all to begin thinking about how we can simplify these conversations, break them down in a way that ensures that young Africans are able to understand, wait, this can actually affect my life for the better. This is what I need to begin. This is what I need to do to begin engaging and amplifying myself in a way that ensures that as a young Kenyan, I'm able to thrive in Tanzania. I'm able to do business across borders. So I would like to challenge us all to begin thinking across those lines. But most importantly, one of the things I would like to encourage us to do is actually get feedback from young Africans. What are the experiences they are facing when they are trading in Africa? And how can we ensure that we are addressing their current challenges and their lived experiences? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Natasha. Very realistic and sobering, down-to-earth reminder to us all. That theme of yours, conversations with young, creative Africans, is very, very important message there. And some of the constraints also that you've laid out, and your important report. Thank you for putting that in our chat box. Now, finally, I'd like to turn to Jean-Désiré Kouassi. We are most delighted to be in collaboration with the Common Futures Conversations today, and you're a founding member, Jean-Désiré. You'll be the final speaker here, and we'll extend our session for 10 minutes. And but I hope that what you'll be able to say will build on what Natasha said and round off nicely the interaction we've had today. So over to you, Jean Désiré.
So thank you very much. It's a good pleasure for me to be among the panelists today. So as you know, like the AfCFTA represents a huge opportunity for young people, young entrepreneurs and small and medium enterprises as we are shaping the continental economy. With the strike of COVID-19 has been evident that setting up this agreement was most welcome. Despite the important loss generated by companies, the recovery mode has started and we hope that it will be effective. The first thing to address, according to me, the digital economy, which acknowledges a rise with COVID-19. In this perspective, it would be beneficial for the AfCFTA to strengthen digital by providing and investing in digital structures and infrastructures and solutions. You know, many digital entrepreneurs are developing solutions, but due to difficult access to infrastructures or even training or skills acquisition, they find themselves limited in the process of deployment. The second thing would be to increase finance, funds, and grant access to youth-led businesses. Governments should set policies and provisions for their young communities to develop their businesses. Even though the agreement is just 10 months old, I believe that launching fund programs in sectors such as industries, digital, education, agriculture are most welcome. The last point that I would like to address or to mention is awareness. You know, most young people are not aware of this agreement, and it would be therefore great to set programs of training where youth will be informed, trained, and equipped on how to maximize this opportunity that African government, African countries are putting together for trade among us. It will be also a way to strengthen networks, businesses, and offer in the same way financing education skills in acquiring investments. I could not end my contribution without bringing to our attention that as we are developing and implementing this recommendation, we should keep an eye on green economy. The future of our continent depends on sustainable businesses that won't affect our environment. We just definitely need to bring young people into the decision-making process and implementation as African leaders, our African government representatives are discussing about the future of Africa. The future is the youth, and the future is now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jean Désiré. Very good words to end this meeting, this event with. I must say, Africa is, the young people of Africa are the future, absolutely. And your mention of the green economy, very appropriate as well, because there will be opportunities, I'm sure. And the question of involving young people and conversing with young people, getting them integrated into the planning is an important message for high-level decision makers in Africa. And I'm sure that the recording of this event today will be on our website. I'm sure also that we'll be in touch further with the AfCFTA Secretariat and His Excellency, the Secretary General there. And I'm sure that he will be listening to just these sort of messages. So thank you so much to you and your colleagues in your Common Futures conversations. As we close today's event, I'd like to say a very warm thank you to the UNDP for its partnership with this Policy for Recovery in Africa series. I'd like to thank very much the South African High Commission and the Common Futures Conversations for their collaboration. We're most grateful for the speakers today, especially the South African High Commissioner, His Excellency, the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area, who gave us a very important keynote address on his vision and answered many, many detailed questions. Thank you to Komi Swou of UNDP, to Judith Ameso of UNCTAD, to Natasha Kimani of Africa No Filter, Jean Désiré Kouassi of Common Futures. And thank you to all of you for your participation online and all your questions. We do hope to see you soon, including the next in the series of Policy for Recovery in Africa.